Okay, so everyone's good with the screen. Everyone can see well, I'm assuming.
Yeah,
Yep,
looks
Cool.
good.
it's
Cool.
good to go.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get started. So welcome everybody. So today's topic's gonna be on scopes and closures. It's a more general topic, and yeah. So again, the slide everybody knows our mission and all the points. So I'm just gonna skip to the next one. So the agenda, yeah. So I'm just gonna go over a little bit of the introductions, and then gonna have story time. I'm gonna have two short stories. Hopefully, not gonna take up too much time, and then I split up the topics into talking about JavaScript and kind of how it's compiled and parsed, and then I would go on to talk about the scope and the rules of how it works in JavaScript, and then finally closures, and then we're gonna do some problems together or some exercises together, and in the middle, we're also gonna be going through code together as well. By the way, if I move this, can hang on. If I move this here, okay, you guys can see that. Okay, got it. So, uh, yeah, so I know you were excited to hear my stories, Michelle. So this is essentially, so I want to start off with, two short stories. I'm gonna try not to make them too dramatic, but so so I took this photo in a parking lot. I can't remember which one, but it was near the near the lakes. So this was in 2016, and what happened was during that time I was going around my interviews, and this was my last job prior to Telus, the previous company I worked at for 4 years before coming here, and essentially this was a dark and gloomy day, and it's not just because of the clouds you see. It was because I had this very sort of traumatic experience. So what happened was I was pretty confident in going for interviews. I had a couple of years of experience now. I did one big project previously. I mean, the previous company I worked at prior to this one, I actually built a whole entire application in Angular, and I worked there for about 1.5 years, and I was very, very confident. So I thought, okay, every single interview I go to, it's gonna be a breeze. I'm gonna talk about my experience, and I'm gonna be acing every single interview. I'm gonna be having other people give me multiple job offers, right? And so what happened was I had an interview on that day, as you can see, February 8th, 2016, and I drove downtown, I parked, and I even did this parking thing where the guy in the front said, okay, you have to pay like a deposit, like you know if you don't come back within time, if you're late for 1 or 2 minutes, we're gonna charge you that extra 30 minutes, right? And so I think I paid, it was like $4 an hour, $4 per half an hour. It's pretty expensive. So I think I paid something like $20, so I was good to go. So I think that was like around 2 or 3 p.m. in the afternoon. So I went to the building, and I walked in. It was good. There were two other developers in the interview and one uh, tech lead. So he just jumped right into it. He started, asking me some questions, and he broke the ice by asking me really simple things like, okay, what's HTML? How would you describe CSS? Like, what are those things? What do you use JavaScript for? And then about 30 seconds after, he brought on the big guns. He started, asking me some more complicated CSS questions, and I was like, okay, I think I got this. This wasn't too bad. So what happened was about 5 minutes into the interview, he went to the JavaScript part. So all the kiddie stuff was gone. So he went straight into the JavaScript stuff. And the first question, I don't remember the first question, but he started writing these really complicated things on the board. He wrote nested functions. He wrote like 10 different nested functions within, and he put all these trick. He put like at the time ES6 was pretty new. It was kind of new, so like he would put in some lets and vars, and then he puts in some objects as well, and then he puts in some arrays in there, and then he would ask me, okay, what's the output of all this? And I would try to answer these questions, and I was kind of able to for the first 40 seconds, and then after that he just kept grilling me and grilling me and grilling me and grilling me, and I felt I was still trying to keep my spirit up, and I was trying to continue to feel confident. But about maybe another 5 minutes later, the person that was interviewing said, okay, this interview's over. He straight up said, this interview's over. We need somebody who knows JavaScript, and it just seems like you don't know what you're not fit for the job. And I thought in my head, hey, I thought in school, like they told us, the interviewer is never even going to give you any feedback, right? You will never get any feedback. Nobody's ever going to say anything. They will ghost you. This was completely different. So when we were walking down to the elevator, he said, yeah, you see, I think I would just apply after I learn all this stuff, and you could come back and we could do this again. And I was like, okay, I'm never coming back ever again. Right. And so but in my head, I'm like, okay, well, first of all, my heart probably stopped for a couple seconds as I was walking back to the parking lot. And mind you, the guy that was like, hey, pay that extra half an hour or whatever, that $4 it was, I came back 2 hours earlier, right? I paid for 2 hours of parking, 2.5 hours. He said, well, why are you back so early? And I'm like, I don't want to talk about it. So I went in my car and I just sat there. I sat there for so long, just pondering and thinking about, where did I go wrong? I mean, I thought I knew what I was doing. I thought I have the experience now. I have a couple years of experience. I've built, a multi-million-dollar project before. Why is this happening, right? And so I actually stayed in my car for about, I want to say, a good 5 or 6 hours. So I actually stayed there until I think it was 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock. And it got to a point where one of the guys came. So at this point, my deposit or whatever it is you want to call it, where, if I came in a couple of minutes late, I have to pay for it. He knocked on my window and he said, what are you doing there? It's way past, and everyone's obviously gone in the parking lot, and you're not allowed to stay here overnight, no matter who you are. Everyone has to leave. They're gonna shut the gate. So I couldn't even get out. So then I said, oh, okay, I'm sorry. I was just like, I had a long day, and I went home and I thought, oh man, oh God, that whole day just went by just like that, and I felt really, really bad. And so because of that experience, I went home and I really wanted to dig a little bit deeper. I wanted to think, okay, what is it that I don't understand? What could I learn from this lesson? And so what I did was I went online and I started reading Carl Simpson's You Don't Know JavaScript. So I'm sure most of you guys know that book. It's on GitHub. It's free. I think it has, I don't know, like the top 10 most starred on GitHub. I don't know about now, but it was back then. I started reading it, and actually after 2 weeks, I got an offer from a company where I worked for 4 years on the leap year, like February 29th. So, and what's funny was when I was reading, the book, I started to see what I didn't understand, and I started to see that a lot of things I took for granted there was an explanation for that. And even though it was even though it was a short 3 weeks, I saw a lot of things that I knew I could improve on. And so what I did was I picked, actually, so if you guys see, this is the book. I picked it's pretty much the thinnest book with 70 pages. There's 5 other books in the book series. All of them have like over 100 or 200 pages. So I'm like, I want to get the most bang for my buck. I'm going to read this book, and I'm going to see if I can read this book and do some practice problems and actually understand what I'm doing, and then see if I can crack the JavaScript interview. And when I actually did go for that interview, in which the company I worked prior to Telus for 4 years, I I actually got very, very similar, not necessarily the same interview questions, but questions that I was able to just, after reading this, I was able to kind of breeze by and really and explain myself, very, very easily. And hence, that's why I got a job offer very, very quickly. And so I'm telling you guys this story because, I'm not saying you guys should quit your job right now and then go interview another company. Hopefully, you guys stay at Telus for a considerable amount of time. But when it does come to time to do interviews or to get a new job or whatever it is, just know that uh, just know that everyone's been there. I've been there. A lot of my friends have been there. But the thing to do when you're not looking for a job, right, is to hone your fundamental concepts, right? Hone your skills and understand kind of the things underneath, and not just take things for granted and assume things work just because hey, it works. So that's my first story, and I don't know how long I took, but I'm gonna yeah. So this is a picture I took. So during that Christmas, so what I did was I read the GitHub story, the GitHub version, right, which is the free version, and then I liked it so much. I'm like, okay, I want the free whole entire version of it. So I went on. It wasn't on Amazon or anywhere on the time. It was on O'Reilly. Thought, okay, let me buy this book series, and actually my dad actually was like, okay, let me buy it for you because you've been talking about JavaScript or whatever in your job for like every time we go to dinner or something, you're just talking about JavaScript. I don't know what's up with this. I don't even know what you're talking about. But like, you know what? Let me just buy it for you. And then yeah, and so pretty much this copy of the book right here is what he bought for me on Christmas of what is it, like 4 years, 5 years ago, 4 years ago now. So yeah, that's the story. And pretty much as you can see, I have a lot of notes written inside. I have these like book dividers, what do you call it, bookmarks and stuff. Yeah, so I use these and I go back to these materials on a regular basis. And even prior to this presentation, I went on just to refresh my mind about the fundamental concepts. So, okay, story number two. This is more of the real life stuff now, right? This is more of like, okay, now you've gotten past the interview, okay, but everything else after that, what happens, right? Because this is where it really counts, okay? So this didn't happen to me, but I actually hired a person at my previous company that I worked at, and I'm not going to say any names or even the company, but there was this sort of one incident, and it happened. I think it was in 2017, and it was a Black Friday. It was Black Friday, so most of our sales are made on Black Friday, and usually, however much money we make on Black Friday, I don't know, probably in the seven figures. We had this banner, and we had these very complicated geo-targeting for different markets, mainly in the US, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. There was geo-targeting, there was a lot of JavaScript, and the entire thing was written in vanilla JavaScript. Now, here's the thing that I don't know if I was supposed to work in this code base, but me and this other guy, okay, so me and this other guy who's kind of more junior, we were supposed to work on this code base that in which we inherited from this group of external vendors. So what happened was our manager was like, okay, build this feature and give it to us. And the whole thing was written in vanilla JavaScript with some jQuery, right? And it was horrifically written, okay? Now it worked and it was great, but you can imagine, what did I write right here? Tangled code. Okay, so multiple global variables. So multiple global variables, multiple ifs, so immediately invoked function expression. There's like, yeah, horrible namings. There's like A1, A12, A112, A13. There would be like these variables. And what's worse is we had this like optimization thing in the middle where we had this gulp script that I built where we would take it and compile it and then output like an optimized and uglified version of it. So yeah, so that's obviously not helping. And so what happened was in that incident, we had to wake up at 2 a.m. in the morning. There wasn't, I don't know who reported it, but there was a problem. I think 1 or 2 a.m. in the morning. I woke up. Three of us woke up. So my manager, me, and this other junior developer who added a feature. And by the way, there's no test in any of this. This was just like thrown together, right? And this was all done very, very quickly because, well, I mean, higher ups want things done very quickly, and so I guess my manager wanted things done very quickly, and because they wanted because so it's a whole sort of chain going down all the way to us, and eventually someone was going to make a mistake, and it just so happens it was the junior guy who had less than a year of experience, right? And he basically made a production mistake, and we were kind of debugging. So I was debugging with my manager, my tech lead manager, and we were all debugging. And when we found the error, you know, I remember specifically my tech lead said, "Okay, look, what were you trying to do here?" And then he said, "No, yeah, I was trying to put this variable here, and then I was trying to put it here, and I thought I would have access here." And then it was some really long discussion about, no, this is wrong. This is not how scopes work. Okay, that was literally how it went. This is not how variables, keep their values. This value actually changed in the middle because there was something else in that some other file that loaded, and that file changed the variable in the middle, and which caused this whole thing to break, right? And so he was extremely depressed. He said, "Oh my goodness, like what have I done? I lost the company, hundreds and thousands of dollars in a matter of hours, right? Luckily, it was in the mornings, right? So, okay, we didn't lose as much money we didn't lose millions, but we did lose a ton of money because, after all, it was Black Friday." And so, why am I telling you these two stories? Well, I'm telling you these two stories because you should obviously learn your lesson, but the two applicable areas of which I'm going to be showing you guys, or the things that I'm going to be teaching you, it's applicable in I would say every other scenario, but mainly these two scenarios. And the first one is a pretty obvious one. When it does come time, hey, interviews, it's going to be pretty useful, especially when it comes to explaining it to the interviewer. But the second one is your everyday life. A lot of the times, a guy who's a lot more experienced versus a guy who's not experienced, it usually comes down to really getting it to the nitty-gritty details, because a lot of times the devil is in the details. And sometimes, if you're not experienced, I've seen not experienced developers kind of just gloss over some ideas and just assume things are the way they are. And this is very evident when it comes to debugging, especially very, very large code bases that are not well put together. And so I would say that most of us here, if all you've worked out was at Telus, this is a very, very nice architecture. You've probably never really had to go through spaghetti code where you would have a million different files loading, and then you would have all these random sort of like functions everywhere, and these variables getting polluted here and there. I'm assuming most people have not seen that yet, because Telus is just great we have great standards. But when it does come time to going to any other company that's not at the scale of Telus, that doesn't have a certain culture of what Telus has, you're going to face these problems, and you're going to need to be able to really buckle down and figure out like these big tangled code bases. And the ones who usually solve the problems are the ones who have very, very good fundamental knowledge of an understanding of JavaScript, right? So now that all the story stuff has been out of the way, I hope I didn't take too much time. Now we're going to get to the JavaScript part. So the first thing I want to say is prior to reading or doing any research on JavaScript, or even prior to really thinking about this, I always thought, well, code, it just kind of runs, magically. You type stuff in and it just runs, right? And I think one day or a couple years ago, I heard somebody say like, okay, JavaScript's an interpreted language, or if you go on the internet, you'll probably still hear people. There's probably a 50-50 split. You'll get people who say, oh, JavaScript's an interpreted language, and JavaScript's not an interpreted language. It's a compiled language, and then there's going to be all this huge argument. So I'm here to tell you generally what's going on. I'm not going to tell you every single little detail about how it works, but JavaScript essentially is not a interpreted language. It is a what we call, when you run it, it compiles something before you run it, and then when it actually does run, that's the stuff that's actually that's coming out of your screen. So most modern languages, I believe, are like that. So the only other language that is literally, not the only other, but there are other languages like Bash script where you go from top to bottom and you're literally going like one line at a time, one line at a time. But JavaScript is actually not like that. JavaScript is you would compile the entire script file, or file with modules, whatever it is, a bundle, and it actually goes through a phase of compilation before it actually gets run. Okay, and this is very important because you're gonna have to remember this, because later on we're gonna be talking about closures and lexical scope, and then that's when it really becomes important. So let's see, yeah. So that's just a note. So now the main question, like what is scope? So for me, I define it as, where do we look for things? Okay, so where are things placed, right? And how do we access those things? That's it. That's scope. And it's obviously more complicated than that when we're going to go and talk about how scope actually works in JavaScript. So here, there is something called Lexical Scope. So Lexical Scope, if you search it up, I'm pretty sure by now in 2021, you'll probably see most everybody will probably refer Lexical Scope to JavaScript, but Lexical Scope is in most languages. And of course, JavaScript it has its own unique characteristics, right? So to define what lexical scope, or to understand what lexical scope is in the context of JavaScript, let's break down the word. So lexical, it just really means, so there is a phase in the compiling phase in which when you run the JavaScript, right before it actually runs, it needs to be compiled. And you don't need to look very deeply into how things are getting compiled, but there's a phase called the Lexing Phase, okay? And I put this Wikipedia definition here, and says Lexing is the process of converting a sequence of characters to a sequence of tokens, and a program that performs lexical analysis, right, may be a lexer, tokenizer, or scanner, right? So lexer is generally combined with a parser. So essentially what I just said was, JavaScript is not interpreted or compiled. It's more of, okay, compile on runtime. And so during that phase, when we're compiling stuff, there's a phase called lexing, right? And lexing is essentially in that phase of compiling. And what's going on is that lexical or static scope is essentially the concept of how variables are already set in their own scope before the compiler is done. So what's going on is with dynamic scope, a lot of the so you can imagine dynamic scope as in when the program is running, okay, the scopes are not set, the variables are not set, the variables in which you put into function blocks and blocks, they're not set, okay? They're dynamic, and it could change at any time, right? Whereas with lexical scope, what happens is JavaScript goes through this compile phase, it looks at each and every single variable, and it looks at each and every single scope. Okay, does this variable belong to the scope? Can you access this variable in this other scope? Can you not access it, right? And then on runtime, that's where everything is already set, and you can't change that, okay? So I don't know if that whole thing makes sense, but we'll look more into it. We'll look more into it in the next couple slides. So, so the whole game of scope, and I took this slide from last year's presentation because I think this is pretty good. So let's see, scopes are about visibility and access. Yep, JavaScript has some basic rules. So these are the basic rules, and I would say the first two are probably the most important. So variables defined outside of a block or function are accessible from within, right? If you use them after. Variables are defined, and we're going to go through examples after these slides. And then variables inside blocks or functions, they're not accessible from outside, right? Makes sense, right? You declare a variable inside a function. You can't go outside of that function to get the variable unless it depends on where you declare that variable. Is it in the parent scope or the global scope, right? So, and then modules, they're pretty simple. Modules are, you won't pollute the global scope by declaring a variable in a module and then importing it, and then you can't use that variable in another module, right? Unless you export it, right? So we're gonna go over these examples or some code after this. Yeah, so and of course there's that scope chain, right? Which is this is essentially what Lexical Scope is. All these different values, these identifiers, these variables, they're set, right? So JavaScript does that, whole compiling, right? Does the lexing, right? And then all these identifiers are put into each respective, I guess you can say boxes, right? And each box has access to different variables, right? So this one, you have the precedence of, okay, you have local scope, right? You look at the current scope you're in, and then the parent, and then if you have nested 100 different functions, right, or blocks, whichever one it is, you have to look all the way up to the global scope, and that's the scope chain. So I know I talked for a while, and so let's move on to some of the examples. So I want to go back to this concept of compiling and lexing and how JavaScript is a compile first then run language. Okay, so I want to ask you guys. Okay, so this kind of gives it away, but so if I do something like this, right? So I do console and I console start, and then I have a console end. If I do, so I'm not calling function. What would happen here? Does anybody know? Like if I just run this right now, am I gonna see? What am I gonna see? Am I gonna start and then end, or what's
you'll see start, right? For sure.
Mm-hmm.
And then you might see end, but that function might just crash your JavaScript.
Okay. So
off the top of my head.
Yeah. So this is here, I'll show you. So what happens is, okay, let me just do it, and then I'll explain it. So, oh my gosh, I can't see. Okay, so you said that it was going to be start, right? So remember how the whole thing I was talking about with JavaScript is more of a compile first and then run language. So in this case, I purposefully, so you can ignore this. I just put this here. I purposefully, what I purposefully did was I wanted a syntax error. Okay, so remember I didn't even call this function. Remember, this is not runtime. I did not call this function. I didn't do this, right? I didn't do this. Okay, I essentially said I'm gonna throw a syntax error right here, right? And so what's going on is, yeah, like I just said, JavaScript actually compiles, like it goes through everything, and it's actually going through the lexical analysis as well. It's saying, okay, I want to put so what I was trying to do here, I was trying to declare a global variable randomly, right? So yeah, that's not a big issue. I'm just gonna delete this. And essentially, during the compile phase, all these scopes and different variables, they're getting set, right? And so in this case, right, JavaScript and everything it's doing, right? It's setting the scope. It's during this phase, it's looking at everything before you actually run it. And it comes here. So for example, the X is in the global scope, right? Great. And then it goes, oh wait, there's a syntax error. And that's why you don't see start nor do you see end. Okay, I don't know if this is mind-boggling, but this is something that is very important to know. So there's another thing that I talked about, 20 minutes ago, which is bash script. So here's a very interesting question. So I just typed in some random thing. So okay, just some random command. Okay, I don't know what it is. Okay, so what do you think happens here, right? Because remember how I said JavaScript is statically or lexically scoped, right? What happens with bash script? Like what happens in this scenario? Anyone? Can you take a guess? If I run this, what am I going to see? Am I going to see start and then finish? What am I going to see? Bash don't need to compile. Okay, so what's the output? Anyone?
You should see start, and then you probably shouldn't see finish.
I should not see finish, right? And then is there anything else? Like I did this, like just an error, right? Is that what you're saying?
Probably, yeah. I'm not super on top of what bash will pump out, but yeah.
Yeah, so this is that's a good guess. So in this case, I'll just run it and then you'll see. So as you can see, what happened was you said so there was no finish, right? But remember, bash, whoever in the chat said bash is not compiled, right? So we're not going through the whole file and then checking everything, right? What's going on is bash is just saying, okay, we're gonna run this line. Okay, great. We're gonna run that line. There's an error. Great, doesn't matter. And then we're gonna run this line. That's it, right? So this is the difference, as you can see, between JavaScript and say bash, right? Because JavaScript, you know, it's compiled and then it's ran and then bash is literally just line by line. Now here's another thing that some of you might not have thought of, and I want you to guess what this is. So what I'm going to do, okay, is I'm going to do the same thing here. Okay, I'm going to sleep. So I'm going to sleep for 10 seconds, and then I'm going to delete this while it's sleeping, right? Right. So what's the output of this? If whatever I just told you guys. Does anybody want to take a guess? So I'm going to run this, and then it's going to sleep for 10 seconds, and then I'm going to delete this and press save. Okay, I'm going to press save on the script.
Does it restart after you save? Like recompile? Or?
Yeah, so I think I'll just, I'm going to give it away if I tell you, so I might as well just show you, right? So yeah, that's a good question though. So essentially, I'm just going to run this, okay? I'm just going to run this, and then in the middle, I'm going to delete this, and I'm going to press save. That's it, right? So how many of you think it's going to be start, and then something like command not found, and then it's going to do finish? Is that what everyone's thinking of? Okay, so remember, I'm going to press save, right? So, you know, I'm not just changing it, and I'm not pressing save. You see that? I'm pressing save. Okay, so here goes. All right, I'm going to run this. Okay, I'm going to delete this. I'm going to save. So the program is still running. Are we going to see finish or not? Oh, we don't see finish. Did anybody? Oh snap! Yeah. Oh snap! Right. So I know, man, mind-boggling. I don't know how excited all of you guys are, but when I learned this, I was just like, whoa, whoo. Yes, it is. This is basically, yeah, the nature of dynamic scope, and we're gonna get more into this. Yeah, it's interpreting in real time, so we're gonna get into this later on. So let's move on to let's go back to what I was bringing up in the slide. So units of scope. Okay, so now we're gonna talk about. Let me see. Where's the? Oh, right. Okay. So actually, I will go through the rules, okay, and they're very simple, and I'm just gonna basically kind of go over this because This type of stuff here is, if you, I know I said it, but I want to show it, and it's a lot easier to do that. And you might learn some quirks here and there. I guess I gave some interesting examples, I think. So let's go with the first one. So the first one is variables defined outside a block. And this is review. I'm hoping for most of you guys. So variables defined, outside a block or function are accessible from within, right? So this is, pretty obvious. Any of you want to take a guess? Is it going to be? It's not a trick question.
100?
Yeah, it's 100. Yep. Oh,
Also, do you mind just zooming in a little bit into your window? Thank you.
this? Okay. Let me just bring this. Is this good? Yeah, I think. Yeah.
Yeah,
Cool.
thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, this is this should be 100, right? Okay, cool, right? Again, very simple rule, right? Very simple rule to remember, and we're gonna build on top of these rules. So now the second rule: variables defined inside a block or function are not accessible from the outside, right? Okay, so so here I'm going to go here, and as you can see, I'm just mixing it up for fun. And don't look at the highlights. I know it's cheating a little bit, but because you'll know VS Code gives you a lot of stuff. So here, it's pretty obvious as well, right? Like you pretty much should see. Yeah. So what should I be seeing here? Can anybody take a guess or take a guess? So by the way, if you guys don't know, arguments.colly is basically, it's deprecated, I believe. You shouldn't use it, but it just prints out the name of the function. So anyone want to guess the output?
Yeah, what Ryan said. No, I disagree with Ryan.
What did Ryan say?
I don't think you see any of your X, Y, or Z because they're all within that function block, and then you're trying to access them with the logs outside the block.
Yep. So I think it'll say, yeah, I don't know if I should be reading chat. I'm kind of getting distracted by chat, but it will be, this will, yeah, it will just throw an arrow, say like X is not defined. Hopefully I don't have anything. Yeah, or it'll be, I'll just run it. Yeah, so X is not defined, right? Yeah. So, and then everything after, yeah, it's going to be the same thing. It'll say Y is not defined, whatever, right? So just to go to you guys know why it's not defined, right? So very simple rules, right? I'm sure all of you know this. All of you know these two rules, right? And so the third one, I think this is probably even more obvious because I know because in Telus, like everybody, use React components and you import like utility. Is my audio good or is my audio?
Your audio's fine.
We gotcha.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so for the modules, let's say modules have their own separate scope unless they're exported. I'm using ES5, CommonJS, so I'm not using like the ES6 imports in Node, so I didn't want to bring in Babel. But yeah, so this one, I'm sure most of you guys should know this. When you require a module, right, you're essentially bringing in something that's in its own completely separate scope, right? So there is no such thing as the pollution of global variables, right? So for example, if I go here, I have this module, right, that's being imported. Okay, there's no exports, but if I try to access the myvar, right, can it access it here? Well, the answer is no. That's just how it works, right? And the reason I brought this up is because I think, is it Fabio, or I think he mentioned it last year when I watched his video, he said that it was confusing because for people who wrote PHP, there's the include function. Pretty much what it means is you could include a bunch of different files and it would kind of just be like a top-down thing where you include files, and essentially it would just pollute the global scope. And so that was fixed in 5.5, not fixed, but the feature of namespacing was introduced in PHP 5.5, and hence the issue of like global functions or global naming of variables wasn't a problem. At least now it's not a problem anymore. And so yeah, if I console log ABC, of course it would not it would not be able to refer to this, right? So if I run this, it would be my var is not defined, and yeah, I think that's all there is to it. I don't know if this is I think that, yeah, this is gonna run, I believe. So it's gonna say 1, right? And then once I get to this, actually no, this is very interesting because it's pretty much the thing that I'm trying to teach you guys, and yet I don't know what the exact output of this is going to be, but we'll find out. So let's see what's going to be. Okay, so it didn't run. Okay, it went through it loaded this, and then we went to, oh, hang on, I didn't comment this out. Okay, let me comment this out for a second. So yeah, so if I run this, let's see what happens. Yep, so my var is not defined, so there's nothing that got printed whatsoever, meaning that even though we require this module, right, it's not going to print this out, right? It's just going to be, hey, my var doesn't exist. You broke, you broke the laws of JavaScript, and we compile. Well, it didn't even compile, right? Okay, so yeah, these are the rules. They're pretty simple. So now we're gonna move on to some more fun stuff. So
Sorry, can I ask a quick question before we move on from like the basic stuff?
Yeah.
So one of the, and this is a tech interview question for me, like one of the, what's the difference between variable, const, and let? And you go through like the ES6 stuff, but like there's a scoping difference between var and const, and I think it's to do with block scoping, and variables have. So sorry.
So that's actually the next slide. So
Hey, nice. Okay, awesome.
So I'll just kind of give you a rundown, right? So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to introduce to you kind of mainly the block and the function scopes, right? And then the behaviors in which let and const versus var and how they differ. Okay, so I hope that's exactly what you're looking for.
That's going to be exactly it. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you're not going to have like an interview tragedy like me. Okay. Cool. So yeah, we just went through, I think module is, I don't want to really think about module. I think it's very, very obvious that, you're not going to be able to access any variables unless you export them. Okay. That's it. There's no way to pollute the global scope in JavaScript if you use modules, right? So that's an easy one. So now the most who's
Sorry, that was me. Just quick question about the last thing that we talked about here. So it did not compile that console log in the other module. Is that what you're saying?
What was your question? Your question is when I bring this in.
When you bring this in, did it not compile the console log that you set in?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it did. So if you look at it, it did compile, right? But the problem is there was a problem, right? Which is, we can't, like, I mean, if I did this, by the way, you could, okay, I'll make it simpler for you, right? If I did this, then it should work, right? This should work because then there would be no errors, right? You would see a console ABC, right? And then you would see an undefined here. And then you would see this is not defined either.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So I'm going to run this and see if I'm correct. Hopefully I am. So I said this is going to be 1, so 1, and then this is going to be undefined, 1 undefined, and then not defined. Okay, so none of these are going to print, right? Because this thing doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Okay, see, I think okay, so what is it? So I put a 0, I'll just put a 0 here, right? Just for simplicity. So 0 at the top, so it's going to be here first, right? So it's going to be 1 undefined, and what is it? 0?
0.
Hopefully I'm right. There we go. I'm right. I didn't embarrass myself. Right, cool. And
Thanks.
if I do this, hopefully, whatever I said was true, right? Whatever I said was true, it's going to be ABC not defined, and you're not going to get console logs. Oh, wait. Where's the ABC? Oh. Huh. Oh, wait. Where am I? I'm confused too. I'm confused too. Okay, let's let me just, I don't want to, maybe we could talk about this after, because I'm kind of uncomfortable with this big screen, like the big text. So we could debug it afterwards. All right. But I think yeah, I don't think this is actually supposed to be viewed, but supposed to be accessed. But we'll find it. See, there's these quirks, right? So you see, yeah. So we'll look at this afterwards. All right. Maybe it's a ES5 or ES6 thing. I don't know as well. That could be it. So yeah. Okay. Cool. So let's move on to like the let and cons and the more kind of like the stuff that we were gonna pretty much talk about. Yeah. So the block function and so the blocks and functions, right? So those are pretty much the basic units of scope, right? So so we're gonna go through this example right here. Okay, so right here. So so most of you use let, right? Most of you guys use let. Anytime there are braces. So here's kind of the rule of thumb for the let. So anytime there are braces, and I do think I believe there are exceptions, but pretty much most of the time, like 99% of the time, you're anything in braces is considered a block, right? And so what's going on is for let, right? Let is for let is bounded into that scope, okay? And so if you look here at bar 1, so I just wrote this like arrow function, right? And then I did, let x equals to 0, right? You did this. I can't, it's the same as kind of the example in the beginning. If I did console log x, I can't access x, right? This is a very, obvious thing. So now here's something else that you guys might not have known, which is that these two braces actually could be used by themselves, right? So these two braces could be done as following. So if I do this, this is actually legitimate code. So if I do this, where's the code? So if I run this, so 2, 1, let, I hope this is it. Yeah, so this is actually legitimate code. And if I do a console log, it's not going to give me, it's going to say like, variable is not defined. And yeah, there we go, right? Reference error, variable is not defined. Okay, and essentially, this is similar to this, right? So this this little block scope, it's the ES6 module way of doing things is that you can pretty much do the same thing here, and this will be the same thing. And this is essentially a function scope. This is an immediately invoked invoked function expression, right? So it's going to be the same thing. And as you can tell by the editor, yeah, you can't access X, right? Because we're in a function scope, and this will immediately invoke after I do my thing. So we're gonna get X is not defined again, right? So we're gonna get X is not defined. Okay. So now these are like the kind of two very obvious ones. They're the two most used. Well, this is very common, and this by itself is not very common. But there are different instances where you'll see the braces, right? So the braces could be used anywhere. So it could be used in an if statement, right? So if you look here, the let, right? So if you use let x equals to 2, it will be binded to, like, it will be within that scope of the if statement, right? So if you see here, and I do basically the same thing, right? The x, if I do x is equal to 2, it's only going to be accessible in these braces in the if statement, okay? So if I do this, I will get the same problem. We'll get x is not defined. Okay, so I'm just gonna run this. I don't know, it's kind of uncomfortable looking at such big text, but yep, there we go. Yep, x is not defined, right? Yeah, so let and const have essentially the same behavior, right? Except, you know, const, obviously you can't assign variables, right? But in terms of like the scope, they have the same behavior. So now we're gonna move on to var. So var, we're gonna do the same thing, okay? Except var, it's gonna be a bit trickier. So what's gonna happen is for var, we're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna see what the behavior is. Okay, so this is where I might ask you guys to tell me what it's gonna be. So this is the exact same code. Okay, what do you guys think the output is? I know there's like some highlighting here on, I don't know if you can see the highlighting on VS Code, but what do you guys think the output is? Is it going to be the same thing? X is not defined, or X is 0, right? Or X is undefined? Like what do you guys think the output is going to be?
That's I think that's a named function, right? Even though it's using ES6 syntax. So I think the variables is like locked within the scope because it's a function scope, but I could be wrong because it's not like a function expression like pre-ES6 syntax. So I think it works.
Yeah, okay. So anyone else? Okay. So undefined as var is function scope. Okay, so we'll find out. I don't know if I wrote the answer. I don't want to show the answer. I think I wrote my notes underneath this. I don't want to show it, but let's just see what happens. So you're saying it's going to be not, like, it's going to be reference error and not defined, right? The x. That's whoever said that. That's what the answer is, right? Okay, so x is not defined. Okay, x is not defined. So it's the same behavior, right? It's the, or hold on, let me just make sure I'm running the right okay, cool. Yeah, okay, so x is not defined, and I don't know if you can see this like on VS Code, but it's kind of hinting that it's not used. So yeah, x is not defined, right? So that's essentially the same. So what about, it's the same as the behavior as what we had for the block scope for what do you call it? In the previous example with let instead of var. So it's the same behavior in that in the function. So now, what about here? Well, okay. So let's see. What about this one? What do you guys think this one is? Because we did this here, you know, and this was, all of these are not defined, right? Every single example here. So what about this example? Anyone want to take a guess? Undefined, not defined, reference error, 1.
That totally works.
This works?
Yeah, this one's gonna work.
You're
Console log 1.
You're 100% sure? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Well, yes, you are correct. It should work, right? So that is an exception in the in sort of the rules, right? I know that we don't see this often, but we'll see the pattern later on, okay, as we kind of go through how this whole thing works, how this whole stuff works. So what about here though? Like I'm putting the same thing again. It's wait, what about here though? I mean, would this this works? What about this one? Would this work?
Nah.
No? What? Why? Not feeling it?
It's in a function.
Okay. Yeah, you're right. There we go. It doesn't work, right? So it's the same thing as this, right? It's the same thing as this. And what about in if statements? Like, it's the same exact thing, right? In if statements. Whoops. What about if statements? Will this work? Like if I do here, if I console log y, I mean, is this? Let's just do x actually. Is this gonna work? Is this not gonna work? So if you guessed, it is going to work, meaning you are going to get 2. Yes, and it's not a function, so I'm guessing yes, it will work. So whoops. Okay, I didn't press that by accident, so it's 2, right? And as you can see, anything wrapped in a function scope, var is going to behave just like let, and everything else, it's going to work. Yeah, so that's a kind of general pattern here, and I hope, was it Dan or whoever else? That's essentially the pattern, the rule of thumbs, right? Which is let you pretty much it pretty much will never work unless you're calling it in the same block scope, right? In the same curly braces, right? But in var, it's it won't ever work unless it won't work if they're in functions, block scope functions. But then anything else, right? The rule of thumb is it will basically work. It will kind of act like global function, not global functions, but it will kind of act like let, not let, like, what do you call it? Whoever said, var scope, like cons block, pretty much. So anyway, I hope that answers your question, Dan. And let's go on to the next topic. So another very popular topic, right, which is related to let const and var, which is hoisting. Okay, so hoisting is one of those things where I think this is probably the definition that I see, I think, everywhere. So people are like, okay, hoisting is basically moving everything to the top of the current scope, right? I mean, I think most people would think that is what hoisting is. And it's true somewhat, but the way that you need to think about it is more of like how the compiler is thinking about it, which is all the variables and functions are processed first, right, before execution, right? So you kind of just have to look line by line instead of thinking it just gets moved up. So the first example is I like to show you is, so what happens is when you do console log a, right, most people for some reason will think, well, what happens here, right? So what happens here is that console log will console log out undefined, okay? So it's not going to be a reference error. And it's not going to, because we declared var, even though we declared var afterwards, right? And this is irrelevant. It doesn't do anything, right? We could actually even delete this, right? I'll just leave this here though. So, but most people in their head is that they're thinking everything is put to the very top, right? Everything is like, okay, let me just put everything to the top, and then the var a that comes here, it's actually moved to the top, and it's actually undefined, right? And then when you do a console log, okay, the console log shows a, which is undefined, but that's actually not how it works, right? And so this is a very important thing to remember. And var versus let and const, they behave differently because var is the old school way of doing it, and this is kind of its behavior, right, from a compiler's point of view. And let essentially was sort of the, I guess the whoever was it, whoever put the request to TC39, they said, okay, this madness has to stop. We need the consistency of always, making people put their declarations at the way top, right, and making it very, very obvious, and hence why we have something like let. And so, in this example, we're going to look at this code, and what is the output for this console log? Well, it's can anyone tell me what it is and why? Okay, so it's going to give it's going to give an error. Okay, it's pretty much going to say, yeah, it's going to give an error, and this is so I'll just run. Yeah, it's not going to be undefined. If you use var, it's going to be undefined. But if you use let, it's going to give you, it's going to throw, it's going to say variable uninitialized or variable not declared yet, something like that in JavaScript. So let me just do that, and yeah, there we go. Yeah, so it says variable uninitialized, right? And this is what they call the TDZ, which is the temporal dead zone. So this is kind of one of those things where we want something like this to happen because we want to have people not have variables be hoisted or have the same behavior as var, right? And hence that's why we have let, and this forces us to do something like this, right? Because this is, it just, for consistency and also just for the average person, it just makes sense, right? Right. So that is hoisting, and so the next, let's see, the next topic. Well, that was hoisting. The next topic, closure. So we're finally, we set ourselves up for Lexical Scope, right? We set ourselves up for this moment because we talked about Lexical Scope, and we talked about how this compile phase all works, right, under the hood, and how things work, how the JavaScript engine actually goes through this Lexing phase, and it parses and tokenizes different things, right, before it actually runs the code. And so, and closure is essentially so I took this, and this is a quote from one of Kyle Simpson's courses on JavaScript where he taught closures, and he said, and I'm quoting him from one of his slides, and he said that a closure is when a function remembers its lexical scope even when the function is executed outside that lexical scope, right? So so this kind of sounds really weird, but we're gonna break down what this really means. So the first thing to note is that you'll probably, when you get asked this question, I think if you search online, there's going to be all types of different answers, right? It's going to be like, okay, a closure is, when you can access the parent variables, and you can access local variables, right? I think that's the very generic answer, right? But we're going to go a step further, and we're going to break down what this really means. So we talked about lexical scope, and we know what lexical scope is. So a function remembers its lexical scope, right? So remember what I said about, okay, it goes through that Lexing phase, and it pretty much puts everything into place before it's ran, right? The JavaScript engine, the compiler. So all the variables and the functions and the scope and everything, it's all put into place. And so essentially, the scope chain is essentially what lexical scope is. You can access these variables from the first part, which is your local, and then your parent, and then whatever, all the way up towards the global scope. Right? But then the second part, even when the function is executed outside of that lexical scope, what does that really mean? So that's the part that we're gonna really break down. So here I have a little, well, we're going to go through an example. So essentially, the preservation linkage back to the original scope in which it was defined, no matter where you pass the value, no matter where it executes, it retains the value. It preserves that scope. That is called closure. So we have an example right here, okay? Which is, so think about it from somebody who never really programmed before, right? If you explain this code, so if you've written JavaScript for a long time, you kind of just assume certain things. But if you explain this code to somebody that hasn't really written JavaScript before, or maybe hasn't even really programmed before, and they ask you like, how does each line work? People might have different kind of interpretations on how the code could work, right? So in this case, what I did was I wrote a function here, okay, called ask, right? And then I pass this in, and then I have a set timeout. And this function, I just named it. It behaves the same as if it were anonymous, okay? So can somebody tell me, this is not a trick question, okay, what is the output of this? Yeah. So the output is going to be in 5 seconds, it's going to be what the heck is a closure, and then dude, right? That's essentially what it's going to be. But think about it from, like I just said, from somebody who's never programmed before. If you describe this line to them and you said, okay, there's a function, okay, that's right here, that's going to be invoked, that's going to be executed, whatever it is inside this function, it's going to be executed 5 seconds after the program is ran. So what happens is we're going to go through this line, okay, and then we're going to go through ask. Ask is going to look for a function defined, a function declaration called ask, right? And somehow, some way, there's going to be, the console log here is going to know question, which is the parameter passed in. And it's going to also know this global variable suffix, right? So if you tell them in 5 seconds, right? Maybe I'll say, in 50 seconds, right? Or is that 50 seconds? Yeah, 50 seconds. Or let's say in a million years, this function is going to execute this. Wait for 5 seconds, right? It's going to execute in the near future, right? Depending on who you talk to, some people will say, well, this question, I think what happened was this program went through this line and the program ended, okay? And then the set timeout, so the set timeout here is kind of queued in the back, okay? And once it's queued in the back, it cannot access these variables anymore, enclosed in there, question and suffix. And so people will say it's going to be question plus suffix, but they're both undefined, right? So you're just adding two undefined, values together. Does anybody see where I'm going with here? What I'm trying to get to? So, right, again, think about somebody who's never programmed before, right? Now, I'm sure, and I already told you guys the answer, you guys do it second nature, right? Most JavaScript developers immediately look at this and assume that we have access to question, even though this function is technically, performed, way in the future, right? Not way in the future, but it is performed in the future. So shouldn't question be destroyed? So a normal person would think question is destroyed, but a JavaScript developer would assume that, okay, it's already kept. It's kept in the scope. And not only that, we have access to the global scope, even though, technically speaking, the program ended, right? Technically speaking, all this stuff. Well, I guess you can still access the global scope, but this is something that that a JavaScript developer takes for granted. And this is why when you have nested functions, right, you have all these 50 functions inside, 50 functions inside, and somehow, some way, in the most inner function, that function is able to somehow reference a variable. And when that function does a set timeout, right, that function is able to reference another variable that's 3 levels on top, right? And so that's essentially what closure is, right? So it is the fact that there's lexical scope, and then it is the fact that even when the function's executed outside that lexical scope, way in the future, right, at the end of the event loop as a micro task, right, 50 years beyond, it still preserves all those linkages, as what we call, right? And so in this case, for what I just talked about, what would be the output of this? Can somebody guess? Is it going to be undefined? Is it like, what is it going to be? Somebody type it out. Somebody type it out. No, no one's gonna. Anyone gonna type it out? Yeah, Dan. Yep. So the question is, well, hold on. Well, why isn't it dude? Right? Like, this thing already, isn't it a snapshot? Isn't it a snapshot? Well, the thing is, what's going on is, because during that compiling phase, the compiler already set up the linkages. It didn't set up a snapshot to the value, right, in which it's accessing, but rather it's providing this preservation of linkage of variables, so that when it does execute, it knows exactly where the variable is at. Oh, okay. So you think it's going to be dude? Ryan, you think it's going to be dude, not bro? Okay. Well, let's find out. Okay, let's find out. But whatever I just told you, with the preservation and the linkages of the variables, right? Keep that in mind. So I'm going to run this. Hopefully everything is good. There we go. It's bro. It's not dude. So Ryan, you were correct the first time, right? And essentially, that is so essentially that is closure. And the sort of language, right, or the way that I explain it is that values themselves don't get enclosed, right? And values don't get enclosed, right? But there's a linkage to the variables, right? And so a change in value doesn't matter, because during that Lexing phase, there was a link between during that Lexing phase, and right before it finishes compiling, JavaScript already put all the scopes to where they are. And then when it runs it, it's just a matter of just referencing those scopes. And through this preservation of linkage is what we call closure, right? And the language that I've seen that's being used is, you say the function is closed over the variable question in this case, right? So it would be like, it would be variable x, y, and z, and it would say this function is closed over those variables x, y, and z, right? And essentially that is what closure is. And essentially this whole concept, we've all been using it, right? As JavaScript developers, we've all been using it, and it's something that is, I think if you've been doing it for a while, it's pretty second nature, right? So yeah, that is pretty much it with closure. And so I got another example here with closure, and this is kind of like a classic question that really challenges you to explain how things really work, right? So I'm just gonna go through this example. So the example, and it's asked, I think in multiple interviews, and it actually comes up, believe it or not, a lot in depending on what kind of stuff you work in. And I think like I would say for maybe for button handlers, like if you do a timer or anything in some sort of on click, right? Something like this could happen. So the question essentially is, if you do this for loop, right? Var I equals to 1, I less than 0, I plus plus, whatever, right? What is the output? And anyone wanna guess what the output is, or have any idea? Or is it gonna be 1, 2, 1, 2, 3? Okay, all right. Is it gonna be okay? So essentially, the question, the output is actually going to be. I'll just do this. Just do this real quick. Oh, whoops. I think I have. Let me. Thought I commented all this out already. Yeah. So essentially, it's 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, right? And now the question is why? Well, let's apply kind of some of the concepts. Yeah, so Ryan, I know, right? What, like, why is it like that? I'm not sure if everyone else is confused, or like what's going on here. How is it like this? I don't understand. So, so the explanation to why this is happening, right, which is more important than the fact that it is happening, is what's going on is there is so we're using var, right? So we're using var here, and essentially this whole loop, what's going on is we're saying, okay, let me see this. Okay, we're gonna start off with I is equal to 1, 2, 3, and then eventually 4, right? And then when it gets to 4, I is going to be equal to 4, right? So this thing I is going to be to 4, right? And then what's going to happen is this thing is going to run. So somewhere in the future, it's going to run, and it's going to refer to I. Okay, so about 1 second after. And then the second loop, right? The second loop, another second, like this, right after the split second of split millisecond, sorry, right? So essentially, this function is going to be executed afterwards, and then so on and so forth, right? For 3 functions, right? And at the end, when they have executed, right, 1 second, into the future, remember that lexical scope, remember closure, right? Remember, a function, when a function is executed, there's a preservation of that linkage of variables, right? So closure is when a function remembers its lexical scope, even when the function is executed outside of the lexical scope, right? So this is essentially what happened, right? The var I is equal to 4, and then somewhere in the future, right, I'm going to delete this, right? The console log happens 1 second after. All these 3 console logs happen, right? Can you see that? Can you see that? So this is going to go, okay, well, there's a preservation of value, which of the variable, which is I, and my console, I'm going to console log, I have access to it. It's going to be 4, and then 4, and then 4, and hence that's how we get the value 4, okay, as the output. Right, so that's kind of the sort of explanation to how this whole thing works, and it has to do with closures, and it has to do with that linkage, that preservation of linkage of variables, right? That enclosement of in this bracket, in which the functions inside here, they're referring back to the same exact variable. Okay. So the solution to this, right, is, well, you can do this, right? So what's going on here is sort of the solution that you can perform is to use a let, right? Because A let is essentially going to make it so that, well, you have to do the let within these two braces, right? Because what's going to happen is, so here, this is actually going to work, right? I'm just gonna do it so that you guys can see what actually happens. So it's going to be you guys. I kind of just already told you it's going to be a 1, 2, 3, right? Hopefully, I'm not wrong. I'm pretty sure I'm not wrong, right? So 1, 2, 3. There we go. And what's going on is the explanation here is that we're using let to our advantage to really do like a block scope of a new variable here, j, right? And then sort of enclosing it into its own little particular little box, little scope. And so what this code actually look like if you visualize it, is actually, it looks like this. So the I is 1, right? And then in here, it's kind of saying, okay, let j equals to I, right? So now this thing will refer to j here. And because it's block scope, right, the next one that happens when I becomes 2, right, j is going to equal to I, and this is going to be block scoped inside this entire scope. And then when it's 3, it's going to be the same thing. So when this whole thing executes, right, so this console log executes, it's going to refer back to the j, okay? And that's why when we do this, it's going to be 1, 2, 3, right? So that's the explanation. And then in ES6, as most of you guys know and what you use is, this is just a pretty way of using it, because nobody wants to really do this. Where is it? Nobody really wants to do this. And this is essentially just saying, okay, this is going to do this every time. This is essentially the solution to fixing it. And hopefully at this point, you guys will truly know how to explain how this particular piece of code actually works, right? So if I run this, right, this should be exactly what it was before, which is 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so there we go. 1, 2, 3. Yeah. So that's it for closure. Yeah. So let's see. I think this is pretty much it, and I think I'm gonna go through some. Let me see if there's anything else. Right. So there's some practice problems of what we've learned, and yeah, and hopefully you guys, can tell me what you've can help me out with these problems, right? So I got this problem here, first problem. Yeah, so the first problem here is essentially, you got this global variable b, and then I do a bunch of stuff inside with all these nested functions. What's the output of b? So anyone maybe just want to take a quick look of what this function is. So anybody got any ideas?
Does the b on line 4 cause it to, because you've declared variable b first on line 1 and then declared it again on line 4, can you do that with variables?
So you're asking if
the variable b on line 4 is just going to cause you to crash?
Like, are you saying, sorry, are you saying like this? Like, are you, like, let's say this whole thing was commented out, right? Are you asking if you can do this? That's your question?
This is about variable behavior, I guess, because I know you couldn't do this with a const, and I don't think you could do this with a let either, but can you do that with a variable?
Yeah, so that's a good question. You're right. Constant let, yeah, it will literally tell you you cannot do it twice, right? Var, you can actually do this.
Okay, cool.
I don't believe it will throw an error. So let's see if I'm right. So I don't think it's gonna throw an error. It should be 99, and there should be no errors. Yeah. So if we do console log on the A, it should be 99 right here. Yeah. So you can do this. Yeah. See, this is where, thank God we have let, because now at least we have some way of not having this happen. And
like pre-ES6 JavaScript was like the Wild West, right?
Yeah, and believe it or not, when let actually came out, I thought it was crazy to not be able to do that. I don't know why, but I thought if this threw an error, like what if I don't want my code to break or something? I don't know. That was what I was thinking, right? When it just came out. And now I'm thinking, okay, it makes sense because you just don't want something like this to happen because especially like I said, you work at a big code base and especially it's all spaghetti code. You'll see that var just it breaks down very very quickly, right? Because this is a lot better than having var a in 50 different places, right? Okay, cool. So yeah, so what was it? So this thing is not gonna break, right? I mean, at least not from the vars. What's the output gonna be? Is it gonna be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, undefined, reference error? Like any guesses? Anyone? So guess is 4 for above function. Okay, cool. Yeah. So let's look at it like this. Why wouldn't it be 1? Well, I guess it can't be 1 because even if we, I'm thinking 4 then 1. Yeah, so it's not going to be 1 because when we execute this, we already have var b equals to 2, right? So that's already, that's because it's going to look up the scope chain, right? And it never gets to b. And then when you do invoke inner, the inner is, there's a b. So it seems like, okay, we're doing an increment on the b. So we're doing an increment on the 2, and then we do a var b equals to 4. Okay, so does everyone want to put their answer? Are they going to put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 100, 0? Okay, 4. So yes, it is. It is 4, and I'm just going to run it real quick just to prove it is 4. So the kind of trick that I was trying to really lure everybody in is that var. You know how that I said most people say, oh, var. Variables in JavaScript is hoisted by default, right? So some people would actually think, well, okay, if that's the case, b is equal to 4, and then we do an increment on the b, which means that b is going to be 5, right? So that's kind of the trick there, and if you were paying attention, and hopefully you were, it's not, right? So that's not the way to think about it. The way to think about it is all the functions are processed first before execution, meaning you go and look line by line, right? You have to think like how the compilers think, line by line, right? So the b here being incremented to 3 now, right? It doesn't matter, right? This thing overrides it completely. So b is not hoisted in any sort of fashion. B is going to be just whatever this thing is, okay? All right, cool. So that was just a fun little practice problem. So number 2, okay, this one, what about this? I think this one's kind of tricky. Anyone got any guesses? What's the output going to be? Is it going to be like 12, or is it going to be, you know what? I'll just make this easier for you guys. I feel like this strings concatenation is going to screw everyone over. So what's the output of this going to be? Anybody? Is it going to be 12? I mean, not 12. 3, or not 3. Sorry, 4 and then 3. Is it going to be? Is it just going to be 3, or is it going to be 4? Is it going to be both? Is it going to? Okay, all right. Okay, 4 and then 3. All right. Okay, that looks okay. So, okay, good guesses. So hold on, will this even run? Like, is the compiler gonna be good? Is everything gonna be happy? Yeah, might have to think about that for a couple seconds. So we're gonna run this and we're gonna see what happens. So here, unfortunately, we're going to get an error. Okay, and what is that error? It is going to be func, cannot access func before initialization. Yeah. So this is a kind of a trick question because I used a const here. Remember, const and let behave very similarly, and I called a const before, yeah. So there we go, right? And for function declarations, if you guys are not aware, when you create any function declaration, you can just, you can actually, this should work as well, right? You can actually, it actually compiles it and it looks at it and it's all good. And then when you call it, it should work. So if I do this, let me just comment this part out. And if I do this, it does give me 3, right? So function declarations are hoisted, quote unquote, more like, when it does compile, it's more like you can access it wherever you want. You don't have to place it on top or bottom. But then they'll always be defined as long as they are inside the code. Whereas function expressions, right? Like especially like let and const, like it's not going to work. It's just going to work like every other variable, right? So yeah, that was a tricky one. Okay, I don't know what this bankruptcy thing is all about, but yeah. So yeah, and by the way, I did all this just to kind of trick you guys. Okay, like I did all this like stuff, moving functions around, and I put a let x, and yeah, just to see if you guys could spot it. Okay, so now here's a pretty easy one. I think yeah. So I just have this. I have some nested functions. It's pretty similar to the first one. So what is going to happen here is, why don't you guys take a look at this and let me know what is the output. So essentially, we're just trying to figure out what my friend is, the variable. So we're trying to console log it out. And so we have like this thing that we pass here into this function, and then we have a global function outside of the scope, and then yeah, we have a name function here, right? I don't know if you guys have seen this, but we got a name function here, right? And you have seen I used this somewhere else, right? Like what's gonna happen here? Is it gonna break? Is it not gonna break? Is this, is something gonna happen? Is everyone having fun just looking at these problems? Me too. Me too. Yeah. So what's the output? Like, is there going to be any? Is it going to run? Is there going to be an error? Is there, is there going to be something like what is there? What is there going to be? Is it going to be David, then Monique, or Monique, and David? Like, what's the output?
When you call the Europe function, you're not providing it with a parameter.
Mm-hmm.
When you call it, is it necessary to call it with a parameter? Like you've listed a parameter on the function declaration.
Yeah. So are you asking me if I don't pass in anything, is it going to break? Is that maybe what you're asking?
Yeah, because.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
No, it'd be fine. Well, I don't know.
Okay, so I'll just give you a little clue here. So this just means, like this thing, right? Just means whatever I passed in. So I basically passed in, if I didn't pass anything, this is undefined, right? So I'm just moving this here to show you what is it set to. It's set to undefined, right? So this is essentially what this thing means here. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, so I'm just, here's the clue, right? That's the clue, right? I hope that helps you.
Yeah, I think your friend's going to be David.
So it's going to be David. So is it going to be like, what's the console log in the order? What's the order of console log? Paris doesn't have access to my friend. Which my friend? Okay. I don't know if this was more difficult. I don't know if this is very, very tricky for you guys. So yeah, okay. So what's happening here? Like when we, so we do this first, right? So yeah, so this is gonna be second, right? Because so this function expression is declared first, and then we call this, right? So this thing has to come first, right? So this thing has to print it out. This thing gets printed out first, and then this thing, right? So anybody, is that enough clue for you guys? For anybody? For everybody? Okay. If I pass an undefined, it's not, so it's gonna break? Is that what you're saying? It's gonna break? Okay. You can't unassign an undefined value. Why not? Why not? So can't do that? Let me use this.
I mean, you can't say undefined equals X because undefined is undefined, right?
Undefined equals X? What is X?
No. I was just saying it as an example. Like,
Oh, okay.
you pass an undefined to this function. You can't say undefined now equals Monique because undefined was never given. Like, undefined is not a variable in memory, right?
Yeah. So okay. So by the way, this is the same thing. Okay. If you're wondering, if I don't do this, so what's going on is this thing is automatically undefined, right? This thing is automatically undefined, and then this thing overrides this method signature. So this is actually what's going on right now. You guys use default method signatures, right, for the values. So this is actually what's going on, right? If we don't pass any values, this is what's going on, right? And then we're saying, okay, you have this. Okay, we're gonna override your my friend equals undefined with my friend equals Monique. Okay, so that's essentially what's going on right here. Okay, so Audrey, yeah, yes. So okay, let's just before we run it. Okay, let's back up and let's do this together. Okay, so if I get it wrong, you guys can make fun of me. Okay, okay, because I don't really know the answer to this either. So well, not I didn't memorize the answer or anything, so I don't know. So let's figure out what's going on here. So we have this global. Okay, so we have a function. It's it's David. Okay, my friend is David. All right, cool. It's in the inside in the global scope, right? So that's great. Let's see, Europe, right? So whatever I just said, right? This is basically this, right? So essentially, if I passed in Tom, right? This could have been Tom, right? This could have been Tom. So okay, cool. But the thing is, Tom is getting overwritten by Monique, right? So it doesn't matter what I pass in, right? It really doesn't matter, right? So that's what's happening, right? And then here we're executing France, right? So remember the compiler, it compiled through everything and then it runs from top to bottom. So this is not going to be console log first, but rather this is going to be executed. This is going to be executed first, France. So France is a function, right? Let's see. So France is a function, and then within there, okay, we have Paris. So Paris does get invoked, and it seems like we have this variable called friend. So in this case, the preservation of values, right? Even though we called it here and then we called it here, this variable, my friend, is going to go up the scope chain. So it's going to come out, right? So it's going to come out of the scope, right? We're gonna see. Okay, is there my friend here? Well, there's no my friend here. And then is my friend in this scope? Ah, my friend is in this scope. So it's going to be Monique. Okay? And then once this is done, we're going to execute my friend again. And we're going to look only at the local scope. And then we're going to move up, right? The scope chain, right? We're going to move up the scope chain. And we see that my friend is Monique. So it's going to be Monique, right? And that is poor David. He was a friend from small times. Yeah, okay. Monique gets to go to Paris twice. So yeah, so I'm just gonna delete this, and I think this is the original code. Yeah, should be the original code. So what if you call this function with no args? Still the same, right? Yes, it should be the same. So my evaluation, hopefully I'm not wrong, it's gonna be Monique, right? Oh crap, number three. There we go, Monique and Monique, right? And to answer your question, yes, if you do undefined, or sorry, if you do nothing here, it is still going to be the same answer, because Monique is right over here, right? Because what happens again, this is going to be undefined, right? The default method signature, and then this is going to be overwritten by Monique, right? So Monique gets to go to Paris a lot. So we're just going to run this, right? So right here, as you can see, Europe, there's nothing here, right? And then we're going to run it. We got Monique twice. And yeah, that is the entire presentation. Yes, it is very, very confusing. Thank you for participating in all these questions. I'm sure they will come in handy in the future, whatever you decide to do. And so, let's see, a little bit of a summary. Yeah, 3 main units of scope: block, function, module. We talked about var versus let versus const, right? Their behaviors, and then we talked about closures. Giving it kind of more of that what do you call it? That higher level definition, right, of lexical scope, right? And then the preservation of those variables, right? So, and then we talked about some of those. We applied some of those concepts, right, to some practice problems. Yeah, and yeah, that pretty much concludes our presentation. So before I conclude, actually, yeah, so these are just 2 great resources that I highly recommend. The YDK.js series, if you want to get a more in-depth understanding, of JavaScript, and then if you guys have heard of Front-End Masters, they're pretty good. Kyle has a course that's complementary to the book, or a book complementary to the course. They're very useful together. So I suggest you, go and take a look at these resources. You don't have to buy the books. Front-End Masters will cost per month, I think. They have a monthly subscription, but JS, you can just go to the GitHub, and 143K stars. So it's pretty popular. He has come up with a 2nd edition called You Don't Know JS Yet. You can read whichever one. He's provided very good explanation for both resources. Okay, so yeah, so is there any questions or anything of that nature from anyone? Was it confusing? Was it hard? Were the questions too hard, too difficult? What is the question? How
I'm
can
just
you
really
explain?
confused as to how undefined is being given a value when undefined isn't even a variable. Like, that's what's confusing to me.
Undefined isn't a variable? Undefined isn't... So undefined, okay, so...
Like, it's never been declared.
Yeah,
Like, we never had x equals undefined, right? So how can undefined take the place of x and then be assigned a new value? So that's why I'm interpreting what I just saw here.
Yeah, do you know variadic functions or like arguments? Because essentially, you know, in JavaScript, you can essentially...
You know, you can give them default values.
Yeah, you can give default values. But so is this the confusing part? Like, basically, when I don't pass anything, how is this undefined, right? How is my friend undefined? Right?
No, that makes sense. That my friend, the parameter my friend would be undefined. But so what doesn't make sense to me is if my friend is now undefined, how can you say undefined can now hold some value when undefined is not a variable, right?
No, my friend undefined can hold some sort of value. No, undefined is a value. It's not a variable.
But you can, but what essentially what I'm interpreting this as is saying, say at the top there where you have let my friend equals David, what I'm essentially seeing is let undefined equal Monique, right? Which to me doesn't make any sense.
Let undefined equal to Monique. So if I don't think you can't declare like, you can't do this actually.
Exactly, but basically what I'm seeing this function do is essentially doing this on line 5, like, except not undefined. It's gonna be Monique, right? So that's how I'm like reading this function being called with no argument past it.
So you know the primitives in JavaScript, right? So undefined is a primitive, right?
Yeah.
I don't think you can use the keyword undefined to create a variable with undefined.
Yeah, I'm not conveying my confusion very well, but yeah, it's okay.
You can like Slack me later or something. I don't know if you can.
Yeah, because like essentially it looks like to me that like the my friend parameter, which is nothing, is coming in as undefined, but then you're now giving it value when undefined is always going to be undefined unless it's part of a variable that's getting reassigned, right?
So this is the part that's confusing you then, like this intermediary step that's happening.
Yeah, because essentially then it looks like undefined is now going to be a variable which can then take value.
Undefined is going to be a variable that can take value. I'm not sure what that means. Undefined. Can you elaborate on the undefined can take on a variable or a value?
I don't know. I'm just explaining this poorly, I guess.
Okay. Well, you can always Slack me, So yeah, if you have any other questions. So yeah, it seems like everything is good, and yeah, hopefully everybody enjoyed the problems. And yeah, that'll be it for me. Anything else from you, Michelle?
No, I don't have anything to add. I think that was very thorough and very interesting. Thank you.
Oh, by the way, I'm just wondering, can I? Okay, no, so I was thinking maybe creating a repo to put the code, and I guess it would just be under Telus, and yeah, and then I guess everyone can have access to it as a complement to the videos, right? Okay, so I'll probably do that, and yeah, I'll probably do that, and yeah, and give everybody that repo, access to that repo. Yeah, so that's it. That's it.
Thank you so much. This is like really well explained.